Hey everybody, it's Randy. It's the lecture. Yay! Okay, so this week what we're going to talk about is structural elements. Okay, so this is the kind of the inner workings of HTML from the point of view of kind of the mainstream stuff that you're going to run into as you work your way through this course. So anyhow, I've got a really interesting lecture today. Did it this week on Prezi. So it's a little more kind of swoopy and interactive, and we'll see how that goes. You can obviously give me your feedback and see if you guys dig it, or if you don't, then let me know that too, and I will, I guess, abandon it. Anyhow, let's move ahead. All right, so we'll start with like we did last week with the story so far. Where we are is, we've learned to build the basic pages. We've got the tags these tags that are in this text, this plain text that you did, are markup tags that provide kind of this meaning. They give some semantics to the to what the content is itself. It's not just plain text. And we learned that there are some categories of tags, and so we're going to go through what those are. So first, you have kind of what we talked about is the core page structure. Now, what is this? These are kind of the critical elements, the elements of HTML that you kind of need to actually get a page up. Now, could you get by with not doing all of these? Yes, but this is kind of the minimum amount of HTML that would validate correctly using the HTML validator that I have you guys use. So just keep that in mind, that this text is kind of the basics. Okay, so, and that includes the first one being the doc type. We're up here. You have the doc type. You have the HTML tag. And notice, just take a moment where notice that the doc type doesn't have an opposite at the bottom, right? It has this bang at the front. It says bang doc type HTML, and then there's no closing tag for it. Just keep that in mind. The HTML tag does, as does the head, okay, and the body, and the title. So the title here being my page. And then once again, you have this tag that doesn't have a closing tag at the other end, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the lecture, but I wanted to call out now so that you kind of get a sense of where we're headed with this, okay? So just get an understanding that there are tags that have an opening tag and then a closing tag, and then there are other ones that don't. Okay, so suffice that. All right, moving on. Okay, we also have shown you headings and paragraphs, okay? And these are these basic elements that kind of really help. They're the first visible elements that you kind of get out of your content. So this would be the use of the H1 and H2 tags for headers, or headings rather, and then the P tag for paragraphs. Okay, so here's these, and just as another one of these things to think about, tags like this, where they clearly define a block of content. These are considered what they call block elements. Okay, they render in a browser kind of separate from everything else. Okay, so again, just keep that in mind, that concept in mind. Okay, and the last thing that we've done to this point is hyperlinks, which decorate. So the idea here is that it decorates specific content and gives it some extra meaning. Okay, and the example here is this A tag with the href of a pound go or hash go, and that understand that this actually ends up being what's called an inline element, meaning that it doesn't actually physically separate the content from its neighbors. Okay, not like a paragraph tag or a heading. The A tag is an inline sort of tag. Okay, and those two kind of tag, or those two functions for these elements do come into play. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so story so far. Let's move into this week. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about structure. Why? Why talk about structure? Well, structure in this case, in the case of HTML, basically builds meaning in your content, meaning that you're not just providing basic text, a wall of just plain text. You want it to be organized and presented in a way that people can make sense of. Okay. There's a couple things to take away from this. So first thing about it is that it helps readers to find what's important, or it helps them to find what they're looking for. Okay, so navigation bars, headings, that sort of thing. These are bits of ways to guide the reader where you want them to go. And second, it helps non-humans, in this case search engines, to kind of analyze and rank your content in relationship to all the other web pages that are on the World Wide Web, so that when somebody searches for content that you have, search engines, if they can visit your web page and you've got it organized in a certain way that it can understand, it actually goes, oh, there's content about this here. And you'll get this in later classes in the series, but this is kind of the first taste of kind of why we talk about this thing called semantics. And we're going to get into that word a little bit later. Okay, so that's the reason why we're talking about structure. Okay, so now that we've talked about why, let's talk about what it is. So in short, the way we describe it is that structure creates meaning. Okay, by separating certain pieces of content, certain text from others, what you're doing is you're actually making it signify something. There's a reason why you're doing it. And so by using this markup, you actually can make it easier for the reader to understand your intention. And there's several things about this. So another word for meaning is semantics, and you'll hear the word semantics being used considerably with HTML, especially HTML5, which introduced a lot of new concepts and elements that increase the ability to provide that meaning for both readers and for search engines. Okay, so in the list you see here, you've got some of the things that we've already done are headings. One of the things we're going to introduce to you this week is lists. Highlighting, which we've done a little bit of, but you'll see more of. Content breaks is another category of structures. And then what I call demarcation or boundaries, which are, in this case, really treated like invisible. So let's hit each of these in turn. Okay, so headings. Headings will basically create an outline for your content. And that actually matters to both your viewer and to a search engine, and especially viewers that may not be people like yourself that, especially what we talk about another word that you might hear is accessibility, which again you will get in a later class. But I mention it here because having you guys understanding that you should be organizing your content in a hierarchical way using headings to just at least start you down that road actually will make you more successful once you've moved fully through these series of classes and you're ready to go out and hang your shingle. Okay, so the first way to do that is by using headings to help create that outline for your content. Next, you have lists, and lists help differentiate one piece of content from another. I mean, obviously, when you list items, you have a bullet or you have a number, and then there's a third type of list that we'll get into in a moment that describes how you have a term, or it's kind of a dictionary, or what we call definition lists. We'll get into that in a second, and we'll go into detail. Highlighting. So highlighting helps certain content stand out. And sorry that my face is covering the word out. Oh well, it's the internet. And this is a broad category. Okay, so there's lots of ways that you can highlight certain areas of text or content to make it stand out, to make it more visible, or highlighted in some manner that draws the reader's attention. Content breaks, these now provide a kind of they're the idea of breathing room, or opening up the idea of negative space. Now, negative space is a concept in graphic design and in layout where you don't cram everything into a solid wall of text and images and everything else. The idea is that if you can spread some of that out and give areas some just nothing in it, negative space, meaning that there's no content in that space, that actually gives your viewers and your audience a chance to, even that little bit of space gives them a chance to, gives them the opportunity to, I don't know, the best way to describe it would be they can reflect on the content that they've read before they start to read the next thing. And especially this comes into play remarkably well especially when you're changing the subject, or if you're changing to a different paragraph. Using paragraph tags, you automatically get a little bit of negative space between paragraphs. This is kind of what we're talking about, but content breaks in this case are meant to exaggerate or really make it much more visible that there is a break in the content. And you'll see these examples. Okay, so boundaries. Now, boundaries or demarcations, which is a much bigger word, provide hidden clues to search engines. Now, they're not visible to the reader, okay? But they are exclusively there to help you as the developer, possibly a web designer who is working with you to style a page, or a search engine that is visiting your page, a non-human visitor that comes to the page and tries to understand what content is actually on your website. Boundaries like these can help provide these clues that assist search engines to know this is the content versus this other area might not be the main reason why somebody would visit this page. All right, so to summarize this, in some ways, think of it in terms of structure is meaning. And when it comes to HTML, how you structure things provides meaning. Okay, it actually does make a difference, and you can confuse the reader, you can confuse the visitor to your website, or you can make it really, really easy for them to read your site and understand what's happening. Okay, so that's what is structure. Next up, now we're going to go through some examples of structure in HTML tags. Okay, so we'll start with headings. So in headings, I think this will zoom. No, that doesn't zoom in. I'll back this up. So headings really are the familiar to you now. You've used H1 and H2. Understand that in HTML you actually have 6 levels of headings. Okay, you can go from H1 to H6, and generally speaking, you want to go one level down each time that you use it. So you would first use an H1 tag, and then next any subheadings inside of that H1, after that H1 tag would be H2. And then if you needed to, you could have an H3 tag underneath that, and so on. The important thing to take away from this is that generally speaking, for HTML and HTML5, they encourage you to only have one H1 tag per page. Now, this is something that is in flux, but as of now, we still kind of go with this rule, this general rule that you want to have one H1 tag per page, per web page, and that H1 tag should be the main topic of the page. Okay? Simple. All right, moving on. Okay, lists. Now, the fun thing about here is that there are several to choose from. So you actually have 3 different types that you can consider. First one is unordered lists, okay? And this is where you use the UL tag along with the LI tag. So the UL stands for unordered list. LI generally is regarded as list item. And you'll see that there's one item and then there's a closing LI tag, another LI tag. Here's another closing that, and then you close the UL, and then this is how it would generally render inside of a browser, is that you have a little bullet point and there's your text. Okay. Next up are ordered lists, which are the difference would be OL instead of UL. And the structure is remarkably the same, but the result is slightly different in that you get a number next to each item instead of a bullet point. You can, and people often do, nest ordered lists underneath list items. So what you would do is inside of this list item, you could create another ordered list or unordered list that would kind of indent in, and I'll go into that more into perhaps another class or another lecture, but for now understand that these can be nested, and there's actually a reason why we talk about nesting, because we're going to get to that later on. Finally, the most complicated of the three is the idea of definition lists. Okay, this is marked by the tags DL for definition list, DT, which generally refers to the definition term, okay, meaning the item that's being defined, and then DD is the definition for that term. So this would be the content that describes it. So generally speaking, like if you were doing a glossary or a dictionary or some of that sort of thing, the default way that this renders in a browser is usually that the term, the DT, would come in as a boldface or bold heavyweight format, and then slightly indented would be the definition. Okay, so the definition will be slightly indented from the term, and then if you do a second one, notice that there's nothing in between these, so it goes DT, DD, DT, DD. There's no kind of in-between kind of separator. Okay, so just be aware of that. Okay, so those are lists. Now let's move on to highlights. So highlights are tags like the strong tag. Okay, strong is what makes text boldface in a browser. And then you have the M tag or EM tag, I still call it EM for whatever reason, which basically makes text emphasized. So the idea is that its emphasis is what EM is supposed to be an abbreviation of. So you can see that, strong will make your text look stronger, and M will make it look more emphasized. Okay, and emphasized meaning italic in this case. Content breaks. Okay, so there are a couple here that tags like BR, which stands for a line break or break, and HR, which stands for horizontal rule, and we've already shown you some of that, and you've probably seen that in the examples. HR provides a horizontal rule or horizontal line that is a break. It actually kind of separates one piece of content from the piece that's underneath it, and it's very, very visible. It's hard to miss. Okay, so those things can provide, and there are others that do that. Notably, one's called block quote, that can separate content from its neighbors in a way that provides space and a way to give the viewer an opportunity to reflect on what they've read so far. So zooming in, we've got a little fun fact. Tags like BR and HR are they don't have that closing tag. Remember I mentioned that earlier on, that we've got a tag that doesn't have a closing tag. There's actually a term for that. So some people call them self-closing or empty tags, but these are officially referred to as void elements. Okay, go figure. It is, but you'll run into this, and you'll see this again and again. Like the examples I gave you earlier were the doc type tag that opens the very top of the HTML document, and the meta tag that's in the head of the document, of the HTML document, are in this same category. Next week we're going to talk about images, and the image tag, the IMG tag, is absolutely in the same exact category. It's a tag that doesn't have a closing tag, So you just use IMG, and then once you've done the right angle bracket, or the closing angle bracket, you're done. I mean, there's nothing more to do with it, and there's no kind of inner content that goes in that. All right. So boundaries are these invisible separators, okay? And we will go into this later in the course, but I wanted to just talk about them here because the textbook refers to them, and I want you to kind of understand that what they signify is not something that makes it visible on screen, but rather that it is something that is a hint for you as the developer to see how things are structured. You can look at the source code of an HTML page, and if you have these different boundary tags, or these are what are really called the semantics tags, the semantic HTML tags, and they have useful human readable names like section, article, footer, header, nav for navigation, main, which is really describes the main content of the page, and so on. There's several of these, and but these are the ones that you'll likely see the most. Okay. So that's structure inside of tags. Now we're almost done, so hang in there. We're getting to the final bits that are going to make the difference here. So a couple things that we want to make sure that you get from this. A couple important things that you should take note of. First is that many tags can be nested. Remember, I mentioned earlier that tags can actually be nested to each other. So, and you've already kind of started to see that, where inside of your paragraph tags you would put a hyperlink tag, an A tag, and so that is technically what we're talking about when we talk about nesting. But you got to understand that some tags cannot be nested. It's not too many of them, but realistically, the most obvious example of this is you can't nest a paragraph tag inside of another paragraph tag. Okay, this has historic complications, but it's realistically when a browser sees you put another opening p tag like you see here, it will just silently create a closing p tag for the previous paragraph. It won't be it's not like it creates it and sticks it in your file for you. It just creates it on the fly when it actually reads your file and then tries to figure out what the content is. So you'll understand that it's if you thought that by nesting a paragraph inside of a paragraph you were somehow going to get it to look a certain way, there's no way to do that. Okay, but just also get that this is not the only example that does this. I mean, there are certain rules that you need to follow in order for HTML to validate correctly, where certain tags can be located inside of your HTML document. Certain tags can only be placed inside of the head of the document, and certain tags can only be placed inside the body, and you have to kind of honor and understand those rules. There's not too many of them, so it's not complicated, but it's just keep that in mind, that there are rules about nesting that you need to make sure that you can follow. Okay, and the other thing to take away from nesting is that it's pretty common. So you've already seen, and really that's because HTML itself is hierarchical, it's a tree structure. So if you think of it as the HTML tag is kind of at the very bottom. It's the root of the tree. And then underneath that you've got two branches. One is going to be called head, and the other is going to be called body. And then underneath those are going to be other things. And so it kind of fans out in this nice little lovely tree. And so thinking in those terms of how HTML actually looks to a computer can help you understand why it does things the way that it does. So it's not important for you to really get that right now, but it's something that I want to just put out there for you. You'll hear it. You're going to hear it several more times in the course of these classes, such that hopefully by the end of this class, 50B and 50C, you will totally get it. Yeah, so it's just that simple. All right, so that is it for this week. Okay, so it's a longer lecture tonight, but not horribly long, I hope. the takeaway here for this lecture is structure is meaning. Okay, structure provides that that first level of semantics to your reader and to search engines that are going to visit your web pages, and that it can really make a big difference to learn early how to take best advantage of that. Okay, couple things. Don't forget the homework. So based on kind of how things have been going, I've pushed the deadline for this module, Module 4, to July 5th. Okay, so you have the entire weekend. I originally had it due on the 3rd, and I thought, well, that's just not going to work for me because I don't have to grade that stuff on the 4th. Give me a break. So we're going to have it due on the 5th, and that will also kind of affect how we do the following module. We'll push the due date on that one. But I do need to start to either reel it back into line, so we're going to have a couple of short modules, or I'm going to fold together a couple modules into one, and we'll kind of make up the difference that way. So I'm thinking on my feet, so good times. The other thing is that the quiz is also due. There's a quiz based on chapters 1 through 4 of the book, and this lecture and the previous lecture. So you've got 2 lectures you can look through for the different pieces of what you're going to be asked on the quiz, and it's like 15 questions. Really shouldn't take you too long. There's no time limit on it, but you're welcome to. It's open book, open notes, knock yourselves out. I really just want you to kind of get that for this first quarter of the class. Can you believe we're already a quarter of the way through the class? We want to make sure that you have a strong kind of understanding of the basics, because realistically what's going to happen as we move forward is we're going to move into more and more complex concepts, including cascading style sheets, which is not trivial, but it's also not difficult. It's just you have to be methodical about how you approach it. Okay, so have a great week. Have a great 4th of July holiday. I hope you guys have a safe and sane holiday, and I will talk to you online. Talk to you soon.